Hey, how are you? Welcome to the MaxBang. My name is Max, and I like to drink coffee. MaxBang is a half-hour hangout, so grab a cup of coffee, and how's your mother? The idea with these is to take 30 minutes or so, take a chill pill, and hopefully build a community. That being said, if you are currently eating something, please write in the comments below what you are eating. If you're driving somewhere, keep your eyes on the road. If you're on the treadmill, keep going. Good afternoon. Apologies for missing last weekend's MaxBang. Life happened. I apologize for that. I remember being on the treadmill. And watching. When I was in college, I wrestled in college. It sucked. Really, really sucked. It took all the fun out of the sport and just lit it on fire. It was all the crappy parts and none of the good parts. But anyway, long story long, we would have it's a winter sport in New England, and so we would start November 1st. We'd have our first practice. You'd have sort of captain's practices beforehand, but they had to be very informal. Otherwise, the NCAA would get fucking pissed. Also, the NCAA doesn't like themselves being called the NCAA. They are the NCAA. I learned that working for the March Madness tournament's Final Four last year, 2 years ago. So anyway, the NCAA only allows practice to begin on November 1st for winter sports. It runs from November to March. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what else happens between November and March, but there's Christmas and New Year's. Now, for most colleges, not now, obviously, but for most colleges, you're in school, and then you have something called Christmas break. So when your exams are over in early to mid-December, it's not like high school. You don't get like a week off for Christmas. You get about 4 weeks off, I think. Maybe even a month. Is that right? Yeah, you get a long time off for Christmas, for sure. Christmas and New Year's. I remember as soon as it was December 1st, just blasting Stevie Wonder, That's What Christmas Means to Me, which in my opinion is the best Christmas music of all time. But anyway, so most college kids, you get like a good month off from school for winter break, unless you play a winter sport. Then the winter sport is allowed to drag you back whenever the fuck they want, and depending on how hard ass of a coach you have, typically that means early January. And if you're on if you have the horrible misfortune to be on a wrestling team, which is wrestling fancies itself as the toughest sport around, they want you back on January 1st. I say again, New Year's Day, January 1st. They legitimately had us back New Year's Day. And I remember, as a petulant 21-year-old, we're talking about what we want to do, and wrestling's a tough sport anyway, mostly because of the weight. You can't drink at all, otherwise you just put on too much weight. You can't eat what you want, otherwise you just put on too much weight. Your weight really becomes the limiting factor in most of your life. And for a 20 to 24-year-old, getting fucked up is pretty fucking fun. It's awesome. So to say suddenly, like, you can't do any of that, and you can't even have any good food for 4 or 5 months or whatever, it's pretty tough. I don't think anyone respected that, really. And so, to say wrestling is a tough sport, I think, is an understatement, because the sport itself is very, very difficult, mentally taxing. It's combat, it's scary, it's physically tolling. But then you throw the weight aspect on top of it, and then it becomes really fucking brutal. And I don't think anyone really respected that. In fact, they went the opposite. They were like, we're just going to be a bunch of monks, we're choir boys the whole time. Like, what do you mean? Why would we want to get drunk or like stay up late or like go do something like party at all. Like, that's crazy. Why would we want to do that? And I remember being on the team being like, well, I like doing those things. And I certainly like a release from staying on the straight and narrow. So I remember we were talking about what our schedule was, and they said, yeah, we're going to be back January 1st. And I remember being like, hi, Max here. 165 pounds. Why the fuck would we be back New Year's Day for a practice? Isn't that going to be useless? We're all going to be hungover, right? And everybody in the room sort of looked at me like, what do you mean we're going to be hungover? I'm like, well, it's New Year's Eve. Typically, I mean, call me crazy here, but typically people go out and rage a little bit, celebrate the end of the year and the beginning of the new year. They make, New Year's Eve resolutions and fireworks and champagne. Is this ringing a bell with anybody? And like, to a man, everyone was like, no, January 1st is fine. We'll be totally fine. And I remember as a freshman, I was like, yeah, cool. As a junior, senior, I was like, yeah, I'll be here the second. See you never. It was a very sort of blah. And to be fair, to be completely honest, those winter practices, so we're back January 1st, the rest of school doesn't get back till like the 20th, I think. I'm in Connecticut in January. I'm the leanest I've ever been. I have the smallest amount of body fat on me. So I'm very sensitive to the cold. I'm doing 2-a-day practices with people I sometimes kind of like, sometimes kind of don't. I'm pissed off that I'm there. That was a real low point for young Max. I was really bummed out. And as the years went on, I wrestled for 4 years in college, which is in some ways something I'm proud of, and a lot of other ways something I feel like kind of sucked because I lost friends. Friends left the team. The amount of fun I had sort of went down. I didn't like do it because I wanted to do it at the end. At the end, I was just doing it to be like, well, fuck it. I've done this for fucking 3 years. I might as well just finish it out. And I always sort of think about that. Like, it's a weird thing to be proud to have done something for 4 years and really made an impact. And then also like, did I really need to do that? I was just sort of doing it to do it. It's an interesting thing. I'm proud of both. I'm proud that I did it, and I'm also embarrassed that I didn't have the balls to be like, fuck you, I'm out of here. This isn't fun anymore. See you later. It's a sunk cost scenario, but it's also, committing to something and taking it down, accomplishing it, What would I do on those days? Great question. Glad you asked. I would wake up, go to a practice before breakfast. If I'm lucky, the other guys in the room brushed their teeth, but oftentimes they wouldn't because they're disgusting, fucking gross, blech, disgusting. And I don't know if you've ever wrestled with someone, but your mouth gets pretty close to the other guy's mouth. Probably not a great sport in the COVID land, but you can fucking smell them bad. Wake up, I'd have a practice that would typically suck. I'd go and get breakfast that I wouldn't really know what to eat because I had to like be real sensitive about my weight. My senior year, I was cutting quite a bit of weight. I weigh for reference, I was weighing in at 165 pounds. Today, I am 195 pounds. Same height. Didn't get any taller or shorter, unfortunately. So I'd have a crappy breakfast. I'd go back to my room. I know I would need to nap. I would be the only person in my entire dorm room building. How freaky that was. Felt like I was in The Shining, only I didn't have anybody to murder. I was gonna say like there wasn't didn't they have a bar with like a ghost bartender maybe? I was the only person in this entire room, in this entire building, and I would sit down and I'd pop my laptop on my chest and I'd play episodes of some TV show. Like I remember I crushed Scrubs. And I was already in a bit of an emotional wreck, and then that show takes you on a roller coaster. A couple of episodes of crying my eyes out when no spoilers, but when The Ben episode? Holy moly. Anyway, so then I'd watch a couple episodes, and then I would like know that I had to get back to afternoon practice. I would be so sad. I'd get up, I'd get dressed, I'd go to afternoon practice. We'd go to dinner. I'd go to dinner with a bunch of guys. I was like, I kind of liked some of them, but I really didn't like a lot of them. And we'd talk about like just weird, gross shit. The guys on the team really liked like grossing each other out, and I was just like, dude, what the fuck? I'm not trying to get grossed out as I'm eating my chili. You know what I mean? Don't tell me like a weird. Ugh. I remember one guy in particular told a fucking gross story about like an ex-girlfriend he had, and like it's a long story, but it's a story about awful story about him having sex with her on his parents' white couch, and she got her period, and how like embarrassing that was for him. And I'm like, yeah, dude, how embarrassing do you think that was for her? Like, fuck you. Why are you telling me the story while I'm eating fucking soup? Like, get the fuck out of my face. Whatever. And on top of it, because I was so disinterested, I sucked. I was like the worst I had ever been. When I was a senior in college, that was the worst I had ever performed. Imagine that. I think it goes to show you, a lot of it goes into like how interested you are in something and how effective you are at focusing your efforts on whether you want to like knock yourself out to do it or not. Anyway, I don't know how the hell we started talking about this, but if you're in something like that, push through it. If you need to quit, feel free to quit. I look back on myself and like, man, why didn't I quit a couple of things that I should have quit sooner? Sometimes that takes the balls. A lot of people talk about like sticking with something, sticking it out. That takes balls. Sometimes standing up and being like, yeah, this isn't fun. I don't want to do it anymore. That takes some balls too. So maybe think about that. What was my favorite New Year's? Wow. I love hate New Year's. For a while I hated it because everybody, like the bars that I would frequent or the clubs that I would frequent were incredibly crowded and overpriced, and you had to buy a ticket to a bar that you went to last night for some dumb dive bar for free. Thought it was really stupid. Now I really like it, or I liked it. I don't know what New Year's COVID is going to be like. It's going to fucking... Oof. I like the idea of review and rebirth, and I like how having a little bit of champagne is really fun. I had a really great one when I was in Miami. I was hosting a Pitbull concert. That was really fun. I had a couple ones where I like refused to go out, and then at the last minute I just like ran to a bar and like had a drink and then ran right home just so I like did something. My aunt always used to have fondue parties, which I thought was really fucking cool. I loved that one. I remember in high school we had an absolute ripper of a New Year's party. It was just us in like a house with a bunch of Coors Lights. Can't get much better than that, to be honest with you. Got a little smooch from someone I wasn't expecting. What was your best New Year's? Let me know in the comments below. So there were a lot of requests for horror stories back when I was a landlord. So back when I was in college, speaking of college, I took a year off from school. Actually, I had a summer job between high school and college, and in the summers, blah blah blah. It was a company that owned a bunch of properties in and around Boston. A lot of them were apartments for rent, and so they would have renting an apartment. Showing someone an apartment for rent is a relatively easy job. Was I very good at it? No, I was pretty fucking terrible at it, but it's still an easy job. So that was my summer job. I would schedule people looking for apartments. I would show up to the place and I would say, here it is. This is an apartment. This is where your bed would go. This is a bathroom. What was weird about it was definitely one of those jobs where my experience stayed the same over and over and over again, and other people were new. And so it was a weird one. I don't know if this ever happened to you, but like, sometimes you'll be dealing with someone, a salesperson or someone like that, who's like really funny and has a lot of like quips. They're like that because they've Groundhog Dayed that scenario over and over again. Like, I would say the same thing to different people over and over and over again. I would remember what was funny and what wasn't. And so then by the end of it, when I had like a charming little spiel going about sunlight in the morning, or where you have your breakfast, or blah blah blah. And so it was a weird thing for me to say the same jokes over and over again to different people and see what worked and see what didn't. I'm sure that's what a stand-up comedian does, blah blah blah. That's what a performer does. Anyway, I was a performer slash rental listing agent. And so then one fall, when I was going to go back to school, my boss was like, "What are you studying?" I was like, "I don't know, just sort of fucking around." And he was like, "Why don't you just take a year off and like figure out if you like this job?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." So I took a year off from college. I worked for this company as I graduated from rental listing agent to actual landlord. That was one of my big ones. I worked on some whatever project. I did research projects. I was on construction projects, and we would do permitting, or we would do where we'd price out stuff. Where are we going to get all 400 doorknobs? Yep, that's Max's problem. What color are all these doors going to be? I remember very specifically having a 45-minute meeting about what type of red we wanted our red doors to be. Fire engine, rose. There was like a rust, like a sunset, something or other. And I just remember being like, man, I don't give a fuck about any of this. Whew. But anyway, one of my jobs was I was a landlord. They would also like give you a building, like, okay, landlord's not that tough, doesn't take up a lot of time. Make sure everybody pays their rent. If anyone has a problem, send the maintenance guy. Boom, you're done. So I had a blunt that they say that's what it is. It ended up being really fucking bizarre. One of the guys, you end up meeting a lot of weird people. One of the guys, off the top of my head, the first guy that I think of, was a legit hoarder. You've seen the show, it's somebody's house, and they have just trash everywhere. Stacks of stuffed animals that they won from a carnival, piles and piles of old newspapers, or like trash bags full of empty food cans, like old clothes that are moth ridden and old, and blah blah blah. It's one thing if you see it on a show. It's quite another when you see it in person. And this guy was it. Old Joe. Call him Old Joe. He lived in a building in a crappy part of Massachusetts called, well, I don't want to say the name, but it was a condo building, and he owned one of the condos. And one day I should preface this. Before I knew what the inside of his condo looked like, I went to the basement, and there was just shit everywhere, as far as the eye could see. Old the horse from a merry-go-round. Like 5 of those, like a bunch of shopping carts. Like armoires and like all this weird stuff, and it's beat to shit because it's in the basement and it's like musty and disgusting. And I'm like, what is this? And the guy I was taking over from was like, oh, this is all Joe's stuff. You gotta fight with him about the stuff. So I met Joe. He's about 1,000 years old. And we started arguing about the stuff. And he's like, oh, this has been here for 30 years. Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, you don't own the basement, dude. You're one of like 50 condo owners in this building. Like, you can't just take over the basement. And he was like, no, whatever. And so every day I'd fight with him. I'd be like, you have to get rid of this much stuff. And I'd take some chalk and I'd chalk off the square. And I'd be like, I'll be back next week. Got to get rid of it. Blah, blah, blah. And we made okay progress. But it was legitimately like a department store of just his stuff. Horrifying. Fire hazard. Like I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of rats living in, chests that he had there. Or, someone could have been living there and I would have had no idea. It was disgusting. Anyway, one day Joe's water heater in his condo broke. And so I had to go up to his place and we were taking a look at it. And I tried to get into his place and I opened the door, only I couldn't open the door because the door only opened about, if a door is 0 is closed and 90 is halfway open and 180 degrees is completely open. It opened about 45 degrees. So I opened the door. I was like, Dunk! And I'm like, what's going on? Joe peeks his head around the corner. He's like, oh, hey, Max, what's up, man? Like, my water heater's fucked up. Like, I have to shimmy in sideways. And these apartments were very, very high ceilings, maybe like 18, 19 feet high, actually. They were really, really nice, but they were huge. And I couldn't see where he was because there were stacks of newspapers everywhere. He had created this sort of a pathway that he could fit through, but every wall was pushed in about 9 feet to make a pathway that you had to walk sideways throughout the entire apartment. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is a room. There's a lot of shit in here. There's a desk and a table and a bookcase and blah, blah, blah. There's nothing in this room. Everything in this room is a shoo, just a sideways way you can shimmy, and everything is pushed in with newspapers, National Geographic magazines, like old fucking Rolling Stones, old nudie mags, like whatever. It was horrifying. Horrifying. What if this stuff falls? What if it falls on Joe? Joe's 150 years old. Like, Joe's dead. He'll die under old Boston Globe newspaper. Like, oh my God. It was horrifying. Anyway, I walked in, I looked around, water heater's broken. I'm like, Joe, I can't help you. I can't help you because I can't get into your place. I'm sorry. We ended up turning the water off to his place for like longer than we thought he would have wanted, but quite a while. And eventually, like, I just had somebody else do it. We had to clear out his whole awning away, but it was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. Hoarders. That's thank God that is not an affliction that I have. But man, it was fucking creepy. It scared the absolute piss out of me. And like, how does a stack of newspapers scare the piss out of you, Max? Like, that's how scary it was. Other than that, we had a lot of there was like some rich people buildings, some poor people buildings. Nothing sort of sprang to mind the difference between rich people and poor people. The same percentage of people, 10 to 15% of the building was a real pain in the ass. 80 to 90%, I never heard from them. The people I had to chase down for rent, that was also not a big difference. The people I had to chase down for rent because they were like $100 short on their rent. That was the same. It felt like the same process as when I had to chase down somebody who was like $10,000 behind on his rent. It was an expensive building. It was only like 2 months, but still. One lady was clearly on a lot of pills. And the reason you can tell that is they act normal, but they're just a little bit gummy. Like their body is like a little bit bouncier, and their speech is a little bit. It feels like their entire body is made out of Jell-O, and their brain is too. She was on pills all the time. She used to tell me stories for a long time. She was lovely. One guy tried to fight me, actually. Man, I forgot about all these fucking weirdos I met. One guy, we go to his place. He lives there with his girlfriend. Hasn't paid rent in a couple months. Knock on his door, or I call him, I email him, I let him know I'm going to be stopping by to like talk about the situation. Knock on his door, nothing. I have the keys, so I enter the place, and there's just cigarette butts everywhere. It was fucking disgusting. And the other weird thing was that he had a lot of things plugged in on extension cords, like fans or TVs or whatever, but he would plug them into the far plug, and the thing would be over here, so it was like a plug, and then the extension cord would be hanging like 1.5 feet off the ground, plugged into another thing, and then plugged in over there. It was very weird. So it was like a spider web style, or like in the movies where the guy has to break into the vault and there's lasers everywhere and you have to like step over the lasers. That's what it was like. Stupid. Anyway, he comes home and I'm like, oh, hey man, what's going on? I've been calling you. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing at my place? And I'm like, I'm Max. Like I've emailed you a bunch. I've called you. I've left messages. Like, what's going on? You haven't paid your rent. He's like, you get the fuck out of my place, bro. Little bit of a tough situation because even though I was 20, 21, 22, this poor guy was about 5'4", 5'5". You know, he wasn't physically very imposing, but he was talking very imposing. But physically, I was not worried at all. And plus, I was there with my two guys. I had two ginormous construction guys there with me, maintenance guys. And I'm like, yeah, so you can't be smoking in here. And it looks like you smoked about 1,000 cigarettes this morning. Also, that's a whole table covered in prescription pill bottles. We're going to want to go ahead and get rid of those. That seems a little illegal, but we'll just forget about that. What's going on with your rent, man? And he's there. He's like, what are you going to embarrass me in front of my girl? His girlfriend was there, just like could not be less interested. She was just like staring at a wall like it was, you know, Nietzsche or whatever. Like I'm like, what? Whatever, dude. You got to pay your rent, all right? He goes up to me and he goes, you know what, tough guy? I'll do whatever I want. And I'm like, yeah, but so does that include paying your rent, please? And he's like, it's whatever I want. I'm like, right, so you're going to pay your rent? It was one of those situations where I probably could have been a little bit nicer, but you know, I didn't want to be. And I've been calling him like 30 times in the last week. I'd emailed him 100 times like, fuck you, dude. I'm out of patience. And he goes like, he like makes a fist with his tiny little hand. And he looks at me and he's like, yeah, whatever I want. And then he like shakes his fist and I lean in and I'm like, so does that mean paying your fucking rent? And he looks at me and he goes, looks at his hand and looks back at me and goes, whatever, dude, not worth it. And I'm like, yeah, but it's worth it to pay your rent, right? Like it was just, I was so beyond giving him any sort of quarter. I probably should have, but anyway. So then anyway, one of the maintenance guys comes in. He's like, hey, Max, we got to go to the next building. We're late. Hey, how's it going? I'm Joey. Joey was an absolute murderer. He was one of the toughest guys I ever knew. He was a big boy, but he was fast. Like I knew him. He was one of the toughest dudes ever. And he loved wrestling, and I'm pretty sure he boxed a little bit. Like he is from fucking Pennsylvania. I was like, tough dude. Do not fuck with Joey. This little pipsqueak turns around and is like, oh, what's up with you? And he like slaps Joey on the face a little bit, and Joey saw red. And that's when it really got a little dicey because I had to like bear hug Joey away from this little mousy dude. Like big old Joe was going to take this little mouse pipsqueak and just tear him like tissue paper. And I had to like catch Joey and be like wrestle him out the door because Joey, you know, was going to murder this poor guy. The guy like jumped back. Joey lunged at him. The guy jumped back. I caught Joey around the waist and was like, all right, so we'll see you later. Just go ahead and send the check or whatever. And I wrestled Joey outside, and Joey was like, who the fuck was that? I'm going to go fucking kill that guy. And I was like, hey, man, I really can't have you throwing that kid through a wall. Like, let's go get a sandwich. I am so sorry. That was hilarious. I'll tell you what all the other weird shit I found in his apartment. Anyway, long story long. The pipsqueak paid his rent very, very quickly. The moral of that story is if you know anything about anything, you don't mess with people from Pennsylvania. That's for fucking sure. Anyway, those are a couple of landlord stories. Hopefully that puts a smile on your face. Make sure to like this video, please, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you're having a great week, and I hope you're keeping your head up, and keep banging. Sorry, quick postscript to the story about the pipsqueak. When I say he paid his rent from then on, when I say he started paying his rent on time, we started receiving rental payments on time, very, very on time, from his mom. His mother started paying his rent. This adult man